Good afternoon and welcome to Talent and Growth Live, our roundtable webinar / podcast style discussion. And I think this is probably my last one for at least a month or so, as I look to go on paternity leave quite soon. So glad we could get this one done. A really hot topic, and the question we're all asking, what keeps great people and what attracts great people as well. And I've got a great panel of speakers today, all of which have been on the Talent and Growth podcast last year. So we'll go do a quick round of intros. And Emma, look, this topic came from a conversation with you and I about a month ago or so. So I'd love to invite you to go first, give us a bit of an introduction into who you are and what you do. That'd be great.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm the Chief People Officer at System One. We are a company that tests ads, brands, and ideas, and we tell people how effective those are going to be with our predictions, and then we also provide consultancy on top of that. And so this was a topic that was very important. I mean, I think it's really important to have good talent in your business. It's always really important because ultimately the people in your business are going to make it successful. But particularly when you're going through a change. So we've really changed our company over the last few years from being more of a service-based company to having a digital platform. We've got quite a different offering now. We've changed our strategy over those years, and over that time we've then had to think about who are going to be the right people to have in the business to really take that forward, and for us to then really grow and scale the business. So really important for us to think about what attracts people to our business, and also how to retain the great people that we have and bring them along on that journey. So it was a really a topic that was very much front of mind for me. We have a new CEO as well in the business, so I've been working very closely on him, and that's obviously one of my top kind of missions in the company, is to make sure that we have those great people. So thanks very much for including the topic, and I'm really looking forward to what Jonathan and Steve had to say on it as well.
Absolutely, me too. Thank you for the inspiration. Jonathan, let's go to you. Please give us an intro to who you are and what you do.
Thanks very much, Paul. Yeah, hi. So I am an Octopus Ventures portfolio talent partner. Essentially what that means is that I work very closely with a whole host of startup founders, companies ranging from pre-seed through to Series B, and the companies range in size from sort of 5 to 10 people to 150. And my role is supporting them in anything that really is people and talent related. So anything from compensation benchmarking through to interview process redesign, through to leadership development and everything else that's good in between. And my background predominantly is recruitment. Before this, I was at DeepMind for a few years, and previously that was at Quantum Black as well. So I've sort of seen growth from 35 to 300 and then 600 to 1200, and I found myself coming back to the world of startups, which I love a lot and really enjoy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan. And last but not least, Steve Norton, please do give us an intro to who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So head of talent acquisition at Aston Martin. We make rather beautiful cars, if anybody's not too sure what we do. They are jaw-droppingly beautiful. And my role since I started last year is to really continue to hire great people into our business, but also to look at, again, how we retain them better. I think we've got some pretty good numbers last year around the number of internal people that took a lot of the roles that we were advertising. Just over 20% of our roles were filled internally last year. So we're doing good things with our internal talent. But I always talk about a kind of hire, develop, retain model. We want to hire great people, we want to develop them. And if we do those two things very well, hopefully we should retain most of the ones that we've hired and looked after on their career journey and their pathway. So yeah, just here to do more good stuff around there with my really good team. I'm part of the HR leadership team under a new chief people officer who joined along with quite a few of us last year. So we're on an interesting journey, I think. Just relaunched our values in the business. Lots of good ideas and lots of things we're working on this year. So interesting time to be at the business, definitely.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. So just before we're going to go into I've got kind of a list of questions and ideas to talk about today. I wouldn't mind just asking all of you, though, just a bit of an overview as to what you're seeing in the market right now, like common challenges. And Steve, if I go back to you, if you're thinking about one thing you've seen so far in 2023 that's sticking out in terms of challenges and trends in the market, what would that be?
Well, I think it's still a hot market. For us, we're in the heart of the automotive sector in the UK, in the kind of Warwickshire, Oxfordshire borders. So there's lots of people around us who are also recruiting like us. So it's just the demand that's out there and the lack of supply to an extent. DE&I is always a challenge. We're an automotive business, so we're in engineering. Anybody in engineering has realistically, hard challenges around this. And historically, that's always been a sector that's struggled to find diverse hires, and it's a big issue for us. We've got diversity targets rolling out over the next few years, so we've made a big commitment in the business to really kind of turn the dial on that one. But it is a challenge out there. But we're doing lots of good things in that area, and hopefully we'll continue to do that as well.
Cheers, Steve. And Emma, of course, I know you've been doing a fair bit of work internally around this topic. Well, what are you kind of seeing in terms of the trends out there right now?
I think one of the hardest things to balance at the moment is the kind of cost of living challenges, the compensation and the changes around that, and then the availability of people. We're actually seeing a bit more recently a bit of a change perhaps in the market with some of the redundancies that have been very publicly talked about, starting to perhaps soften the market slightly. But getting that balance right, I think, of how do we make sure that we have a profitable business while providing good competitive salaries, while providing people with the things that want them to, well, what this is all about. Well, it's not all about money. What are the other things that are going to attract people to come and work for you? And just balancing all of that and all of the complexity of it and all of the changes and the changing climate out there with all of the different things that are going on with wars and climate change, and all of that means that it's you've got to constantly be on your feet and be looking around you, talking to people, and really there is no one right answer. It's about finding out what individuals are looking for and finding out ways how you can respond to that, which again is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting perspective in terms of what the redundancies impacting the market right now. From my point of view, from hire, I've been doing a lot of tech hiring so far this year, and compared to maybe 8 or 9 months ago, there's a lot more people who are on the market. But what I'm also finding is that these people are getting snapped up incredibly quickly. I mean, you have to turn things around really quick. So a lot of people have been perhaps maybe not let go, but certainly given a reason to why they need to be looking around. And but there's lots of companies hiring as well. So it's an interesting dynamic. Jonathan, what about yourself? What do you see, mate?
Yeah, I think actually linked to what Steve and Emma have already said there is there's a lot more pressure on organisations to sort of show how they're different from competitors. And I think there's a lot more pressure on organisations to offer things to, over the last decade, what's become a candidate pool that knows their worth more and is perhaps a little bit fussier with what they want, which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. And therefore the pressure on organisations now to put a lot more thoughts and conscious planning into how do we go into the market, how do we then develop our current talent and retain them, because people are now more willing, I think, to jump to different roles and to different organisations. So yeah, echoing what Steve and Emma said, and I guess just thinking about time that has to be invested from organisations into securing talent is probably more so than I've ever seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jonathan, if we stick with you then, so what benefits do you think are most attractive to job candidates right now? You talked about kind of standing out, and benefits play a part in that. What do you think are most attractive to candidates right now, and how do you incorporate them into your hiring package?
I think it's a really good one to mull over. I think candidates like nowadays an element of personalization, and by that I mean the ability to pick and choose what goes into their offer. So when I'm thinking about organizations that now offer, say, equity along with their base salary packages, is giving them being the candidates the opportunity to trade in some base salary for extra equity or vice versa. And I think being able to be seen as an organization that can mold around what a candidate's lifestyle is and what their needs may be is what's really, really important. As I say, I think there's more and more candidates these days are looking for a role that fits around their life. And I think that's changed from previous decades, where it was very much, how do I fit my life around my job? So I think anything that makes that easier for people seems to resonate a lot more in today's market.
Yeah, I agree to that. And Emma, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you're thinking about benefits. Though the main benefit that people call out for us is probably our flexible working policy and the level of autonomy we give to colleagues, but you wouldn't necessarily refer to that as a benefit. It's more of a soft benefit than a hard benefit, possibly. But it's something actually we weren't really even talking about that much. And the people who we were working with on recruitment said, look, you need to be talking about this more because it's something people really love. And actually, it's always talked about in our staff surveys about how people really appreciate it. So we realised we weren't talking about it enough because we weren't thinking about it as a benefit as such. Along with that, things like opportunities to grow in a supportive culture, like all of those kinds of things are what is probably the most important to people. And then it's the flexibility. So we're about to launch a flexible benefits platform where people have the opportunity to kind of exchange benefits, use benefits that they want, swap them for others, get discounts, those kind of things. Because we just found that when we go out there and ask people what they want, it very much depends on their life stage. So the only kind of consistency was health related benefits were quite popular, things like doing health scans and having gym memberships, that kind of thing. But even that, it wasn't something that everyone was interested in. So there was really not enough of a pattern to say, right, that's the thing we need to do. So it's actually, the answer was more to increase the level of flexibility.
That's interesting. So the platform actually allows you to swap in and swap out. Can you just give an example of what you can swap in and swap out, that kind of stuff?
So there are certain things you can't because of employment law, such as medical benefits. But basically, otherwise, it's pretty flexible. So you could use it for training, or you could use it for gym membership, for example. Like there's lots of flexibility within the platform.
Cool. Okay. And Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have much flexibility on benefits at the moment. I think what we offer as a standard is pretty compelling, and we've got some things in there that we've got to make sure from a talent acquisition point of view we actually get out into the market. So maternity pay, full pay for 12 months. That's a pretty phenomenal benefit to be offering in the current climate, and actually would have been any time in my career going back a few decades, really. So I think we've got some really great things in our benefits package that help us stand out, and also from a DE&I point of view as well, if you're thinking about us as a potential employer. But I think Emma made a good point about it does depend on which stage of life you're in terms of what benefits are really, really important to you. But I think it's fair to say we've got a fairly comprehensive benefits package. We don't really seem to lose out in terms of offers with competitors around the benefits that we offer. But it's really just part of the reason why people might want to come and work for you, obviously. So I think be competitive. You've got to do that. If you're a long way behind other people, that causes you a problem because you actually end up just buying out those benefits anyway. And I've been in some companies where you do that, where someone will say, oh, I'm in financial services, I've got death in service at 10 times salary, and you're only offering 4. I'm going to need to top that cover up. And it's actually not very good when you end up buying them out in terms of salary and those kind of things. So I think we've got the right balance here, I'd like to think. Certainly when we're tracking those offers and how we're doing against competitors, I think we're doing really well. But it's only one of the reasons why people come to join a company, isn't it? There's career development, there's job satisfaction, there's all those other things as well. But yeah, I think we're doing okay where we work, where we have to in there.
And Steve, you mentioned the emphasis on DE&I, Aston Martin. If we focus on the I, how are we establishing and maintaining a positive and inclusive culture? Because we know that does help people want to stay. So how do we go about that?
Yeah, I think you've got to show that this it's something that you're serious about. I've worked at other companies. I was a contractor for a long time, 15 years. So some of those companies, you walk around and there's lots of lovely posters on the wall. There's things in the lift and in the stairwells and that kind of stuff. But you don't really necessarily see people behaving in a very inclusive way, and you don't necessarily see some of the standards of behaviour at management level also being very reflective of those values you put out there. We've just relaunched our values, but it's a really important thing because we're doing a lot with our leadership within the business as well to make sure that they sign up to those things, that they also are ambassadors for those things with the teams that they manage. So I think if you're going to do all of those things that you say are important to you, you just got to demonstrate it by your behaviours and what you're actually doing in there, and that's a big part of how we view our leadership in the business here and how that cascades through all of us as managers as well. So just got to make a real effort around it, I think, really, and then there's certain policies that you do around there, and again, we've got a big push on that this year to just do more and not be complacent, I think.
Jonathan, you're in a unique position, I think, in terms of the businesses you're working with, who kind of may get to a point and start thinking about culture, or may have got to a point and realise they haven't thought about it at all. But what for you? How does that culture piece play into keeping people, and how do you set about making an inclusive one?
Yeah, I think the word culture gets thrown around a lot, and it's a very hard thing to define. A lot of people struggle to think of like, how do you define your culture? Because it's it feels like quite a catch-all term. And I think we try to encourage the companies that we work with to think about, okay, what behaviors are exhibited that lead towards people feeling successful, feeling valued, feeling heard. And I think it's to get companies to come back to those three things as well when it comes to inclusion. Inclusion for me is, do you feel like you belong in an organization? Do you feel like you have a say? And do you feel like you're heard is a big one. So I think providing at different levels outlets for employees to be able to actively give feedback, discuss what inclusion actually means, what the culture of the organization is currently, what some of the challenges are. It's really hard from a leadership perspective sometimes to hear employees what you will perceive as complain about the organization. But I think changing that thinking to, it's not complaints, it's just feedback on how people are believing things can be improved. And I think there's a real education piece for leaders setting the standards. And if they're comfortable with receiving feedback and giving feedback, others will follow. I think there's other small things that you can do, like building channels for communications. So specifically DE&I groups and showing that there's a genuine effort and time going in from the organization. A lot of people think it's just, we'll put a policy in place that ensures inclusion. You obviously need to do a lot more than that. And I think it starts with even small things like thinking about the environment of your office, or the environment of how you're hosting meetings or whatever it may be, being thoughtful of the different styles of people. And it takes time. And I think for us, we always stress conscious thought goes into inclusion in terms of everything that you implement in an organization, from a new interview process the whole way through to an L&D budget, right? How's it being inclusive? And just reminding yourself of that question.
Yeah, great advice. Emma, what about this inclusion piece? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Jonathan's advice is very good, and also true that it is sometimes difficult to hear people complain. And at the end of the day, everyone has a different idea about what is a good culture or an inclusive culture, and it's defined by the people who are in the organisation that you want to be part of that culture. So I'd say it goes in both directions. It does need to be set from the top, in my view, in that you need to have a clarity about what your expectations are. And we've got values and behaviours that we talk about. We very much kind of have interactive discussions with people about what their thoughts are, and then we have quarterly staff surveys in place, and lots of other opportunities for good listening and making sure that we engage in those discussions and try and respond to those issues, with including the people who are raising them as part of the solution. And then you also need to make sure that you're employing people who want to work in the culture that you want to have. So you need to recruit and retain based on values and behaviours as well as on pure performance. So it's no good having somebody who's causing everybody else to feel like they're not part of a inclusive culture, if even if they're having really good results. So ultimately, it comes down to that really, again, difficult balance of knowing what it is that you want, involving people in that conversation, and then keeping those communication lines open. It's not easy, and it changes all the time. So you need to constantly adjust and constantly need to be talking to people across the organisation about how it's going for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emma, if I stay with you, so in terms of, and this could be perhaps tougher these days when a lot of us are working remote so often, but how do we create that comfortable and engaging work environment that enhances productivity, but also keeps people satisfied in their role?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the answer to the last question is a lot of how you put in place the comfortable work environment in terms of having an environment that feels inclusive, and then to make it engaging, I think you need to have a really clear mission and vision for the company, something that applies to everyone, can feel connected to, so that everybody's clear on what their own role is within that, and that's something that then is going to be create that engagement for them, because they're motivated to come to work and to know what it is that they're looking to achieve. And then they need to have clear goals around that as well, and they need to make sure that they feel well supported to achieving those goals. So goals that they feel comfortable with, they understand, and then they get well supported, so they've got the right tools that they need to do their job well. That's particularly important to have good managers who are going to help them to do that and are going to work with them on achieving their goals. They should be aligned with their own personal goals as well, because then they're going to get maximum engagement if they're coming to work doing things that they are going to enjoy doing, as well as are going to get the results for the company. And we talk about strengths finders and the strengths that an individual has and how they can apply those to their work. That's a really good way we find of helping to increase engagement. And it's not just the manager, it's also your other colleagues around you that you're working closely with, feeling well supported by them, feeling that they are passionate about their jobs, that you can come to work and you can get things done, and then go away from work and have your personal time, and keep your energy levels high.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that engagement piece. And I was having I suppose, a conversation with my business partner this morning, because we're about to make, or hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll make our second hire. So suddenly we've gone from us both having our vision and our dream of what we want to build, and actually, okay, we've got 2 other people now. How do we convey what we want to achieve to them? Then how do we break it down into the impact they can have on the business? And that takes them on the journey with us, it gets them engaged. And it's a challenge, but it's making sure that they feel part of it, isn't it? And it's how you get them going with it. Steve, what do you think around that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's around the kind of culture of your managers, isn't it? And certainly, when we're hiring managers, we also want to know what they're like as people leaders. They may be technically very good at what they do. They may manage what's deemed to be effective functions, but if they're not leading their people well, that's going to cause what I've always sort of talked about as collateral damage, because those people are not going to have that development opportunity. They're not going to have a manager who's pushing them forward, to use one of my previous managers' phrase that he always talked about. So, if I take sort of the way I work with my team as an example, I don't manage them closely. They're clear about what their objectives are. They should have the tools to do the job. If they've got a problem, they come back and they talk to me about it. But generally, in terms of them doing their job, I leave them to get on with it. And probably sometimes something goes wrong a little bit, but nothing's going to go wrong around them, because they're all really capable, really, really good at what they do, very driven. Sometimes the odd mistake might get made, but that's okay. It's never going to be anything serious. It's easy to fix, but it allows them to, allows them to have that space to sort of fail and learn through doing that, but in a safe kind of place as well. So I think having that culture where you're not micromanaged, you're given responsibility. Most people want responsibility. They want to do more. They want to feel they can make good decisions and have the freedom to do that when they come to work. So that's a style, that's a culture thing. That's how you work with your people. It's how you get the best out of them, and you make the work interesting for them as well, I think. So those things are really, really important for everybody around Aston Martin. And we also, we look at our managers and how they do those things, and if there's opportunities to coach or develop or improve from an HR point of view as we see it, then we'll make those small interventions that we need to, just to make sure that people are in a good place, really. So I think a lot of it's around that kind of personal style and working culture, and giving people that opportunity to do the maximum they can do, really, and learn as fast as they can.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. And Jonathan, what are some of the things you're seeing that are working with some of the businesses you're working with right now?
Yeah, I think I agree on the goal setting bit for sure, that the best way to motivate employees that I see is linking them to the overall impact of the organization. So is that, what's my purpose within an organization? Feels like a bit of a philosophical question, doesn't it? But I think that people do seek that. And I think the best organizations are ones where you can set clear objectives that clearly cascade. So here is our big North Star goal as an organization. And if you can filter that right the way down to an individual, and ultimately, what's my contribution to that? Like, what am I owning? What is my impact? Why am I doing that? That sort of thing is clarifying that purpose and having those really, really clear goals and objectives. Is probably one of the most important things I see when it comes to motivation. A lot of people will leave when they feel that their role, the word I hear a lot is like, I'm stale in my job, or I don't feel like I'm learning. And a lot of that is just that they don't feel like there's purpose. They don't feel like there's something that they're striving towards or being challenged by. So I think if you can answer that question for your employees, that's half the battle.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I was speaking to a friend about this recently, and they are in a position whereby they are getting paid pretty well. But the work they have to do is minimal, really minimal. And you think sometimes people think, oh, that's the dream, isn't it? It's not. It's not at all. For 9 out of 10, for some people it's a dream. But a lot of times people want that challenge, want to feel what they're doing actually matters. So absolutely get that. There's a question that's come through, which I think was aimed based on what you said earlier from Lasma, and actually was just around what kind of benefit exchange platform were you using?
Oh, well, it's called Ben, actually. So you can look it up, and it's an international platform. So we did quite a bit of research on which platform to choose, and that's the one we've gone for. So have a look at that.
Yeah, we are not sponsored by Ben, but I did actually have Sebastian Fallett, who runs Ben. He's the founder on the podcast last year. It's a really good platform, Lasma. So do check out that episode and do check them out. And if anyone else has got any other questions, then do let us know. Moving on then, Emma, let's stay with you. So how do we balance the need for structure and guidance with that desire for autonomy and flexibility as well?
Yeah, well, I think Steve kind of answered that question already really well. In my view, leadership is about establishing the mission and vision, giving people that direction, but then allowing them to figure out the how of how they do it with that good support from the manager. So you don't feel like you're not, my old boss used to describe it as you're not, you're delegating, but you're not abstinating. You're not saying, I don't have any responsibility. You clearly still have that responsibility, that accountability as the manager, but you're allowing your team to go away and to do the things that they think are the right things to do within the flexibility of the scope of their job and the company strategy. And I think if you get that balance right, which is really, really hard to do, like practically impossible to get it perfect, you've got to keep working at it all the time. But that's what you should be striving to do.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And Steve, if we move on to the values piece, so how do you communicate and uphold company values to attract candidates who align with them? So values, of course. I mean, I think like such as you were talking about with the DEI piece, these need to be. Values can't just be what's printed on the wall. It's got to be an authentic take on what the business lives and breathes. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so there's actually loads on our LinkedIn page. Our values have got values videos attached to all of them now, and those have been communicated quite widely around the business as a first thing. They've also been communicated by our head of leadership and culture very clearly to our business leadership team as well, which is quite a substantial number of people. And then it's about how they cascade it down from there as well. So it's not something that's just given to people and then left with them in the hope that they actually cascade that down there. There's lots of follow-up work around there as well. So I think when you're trying to define your values, that there's lots of debate around that, isn't it? Oh, I think trust is the most important thing. I think openness is more important. We've got a good set of values, but it is now about how you bring them to life, I think, and also. If you see that they're not being brought to life, or you see people who are not exhibiting them, I think it's a difficult situation sometimes, but you've got to have that safe place to challenge that as well. So I know, on very, very rare occasions, I've had to say to somebody, yeah, I'm not sure that call went the way I wanted to, or I like the way that we were talking on that call, and if you're going to have them and they're going to be meaningful things, it's not just the communication, it's the follow up around it, it's the coaching element, and then very occasionally when you do see it is about calling it out and saying that doesn't quite work for me, I'm afraid. I'd like to have a conversation about that if I can, and a lot of people will find that difficult, and I could argue there's no right or wrong around it, but I do think if you're in a leadership role, you do have an ownership part of that around owning it, but also when you're people you interact with, the people that you manage, people you work with closely, then you do have to do something about it. You can't just leave it as a passive thing. Otherwise, it goes back to that thing I said earlier that I think we've all talked on. They are just empty words on a kind of wall in the cafe or in the lift as well. So we're doing a lot around that to cascade it around the business, check that it's being effective, check that it's meaningful, and do lots of follow-up work around there as well. It's not something that's a tick box exercise for us at all. It's something we're really, really serious about as we're growing the business quite dramatically.
Thanks, Steve. And Jonathan, this values piece, from an attraction point of view, how important do you think they are, and how is it best to convey them when you're kind of trying to lure people in?
I think they're really important. I think they're extremely important to have consistency in the interview process itself. So how do you build in, how do you get candidates or try to get from candidates in the interview examples of behaviors that align well to the values of your organization? I think it's a really hard thing to do to get values right. And I think it's a lot of people iterate on it over time. I've seen, numerous organizations just pay a fancy marketing agency lots of money to do it, which I don't think is the right way of doing it. But I think from a candidate's perspective, and I'm always an advocate for putting yourself in the candidate's shoes when you're thinking about talent attraction, is that if a company has clear values and clear behaviors that they're linking, it sort of adds a bit of a personal feel to an organization versus I'm just going on a careers page and applying to a role, and sort of there's maybe some generic stuff on that careers page about how they promote L&D and things that everybody can kind of write on there. I think nailing your values and having them as behaviors is a really, really important step. I'm actually a big fan of values that are not necessarily just one word, because values can be really subjective. You're never going to get them to a point where they're not slightly subjective, I realize. But having them as a phrase or an action or something, I think is really, really important. And it brings it to life a little bit more. And I also think embedding them into the organization, I think as Steve was saying, is hugely important. And easy ways of doing that are things like, I guess, identifying when people have lived those values and giving recognition to it. That can be in the form of anything. It can be a monetary bonus, or it can literally be recognition at a town hall company event or something along those lines. And I think you can even things like that you can highlight on your careers page, like how do we actually live the values? What's an example of that? And that again helps to ensure that the candidates are actually realizing that they're not just exactly as was said before, just words on a page that don't really mean anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, how important has the values piece been for you, and I suppose the research you've been doing?
Yeah, really, really important. I mean, we are a marketing company, so you can imagine there are lots of people wanting to have a hand in creating our company values. But we have a clear set of company values and also team behaviours. And the team behaviours are based on management science of what makes a high-performing team. But then we've created our own acronym to help people, so that people can help to remember them more easily. And then we actually crowdsource the values from our leadership team, working with their teams on what are the things that make us unique and that we want to carry forwards. So we did that a few years ago. And yes, the most important thing to me was, right, there's going to be lots of debate over what exactly those are, but once we've defined them, and there's a word, but there's also then a description of what that means, how do we then embed them in the organization? So how do we make sure that we're living them, that they're part of everything we do? So we do all of the things that you've mentioned. We will interview against them. We'll have like situational questions during the interview process so that we can check that they're aligning without asking straight out, because they're bound to say, yes, we absolutely agree with your values. We will then make sure that everybody who's coming into the organization has a welcome session with myself, with the CEO and the founder, to talk about how we live those values and behaviours, as well as explaining the strategy and all of the other things we're going to talk about. So it's very much considered as important as the strategy is the values and behaviours that we have in the company. We then kind of refer back to those in surveys. We ask people to try and embed them in their performance management process. So we do monthly town hall awards as well against the values. So we get people across the company to nominate, and then we celebrate those people who are working towards the values. So really like keeping it kind of top of mind, so everyone's really clear on what those are, and it's definitely not just something that's on the wall.
And Emma, last year we had a podcast on creating a healthy high performance culture, which I think was about for me, I suppose, and for you, was that high performance sometimes has negative connotations, and people are kind of work to the ground. And we were talking actually how you can have that balance between having people healthy and being productive and high performing as well. So with that in mind, how do we prioritize employee well-being while still balancing it with the company's goals and objectives?
Yeah, so I did love this question, and I thought it was perfectly aligned to the podcast that we did before. So as you say, I believe that well-being is actually critical to high performance. You can't have the one without the other. So if you're not looking after yourself, you're not going to be able to perform well. You might be able to a short period of time, but you'll eventually burn yourself out, you'll have to leave or stop doing what you're doing. So in my view, the two are aligned. You don't need to prioritize one over the other. And as you say, we talk about having that healthy performance culture. So we very much promote well-being. We provide support to help colleagues establish the balance that works for them, because there isn't necessarily one size fits all. It's very much about what works for you as an individual. And we talk about the fact that that's a route to high performance rather than being in conflict. So people shouldn't feel like they're having to compromise their well-being for the sake of achieving company objectives. They two things go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Steve, what are you thinking on the well-being piece?
I think I'm probably just going to be a facsimile of Emma, to be honest with you. I always say to my team, how are things going? We do a monthly review, and in the monthly review that we do in their one-to-one, we go through this thing that I developed a long time ago called 5 pillars of employment. They give me a score for how each of those 5 elements of their job are going. It gives us a discussion topic to talk around, what's working for them, what's not working. We do a comparative score each month. So, and that's really about how happy they are doing their job on these 5 different pillars. And then if there's an issue that comes out because of that, then we can discuss it. We can work out how easy it is to fix. It's all really geared around their well-being and their happiness in the job, because back to Emma's point, if they're not happy in the job, or they've got unmanageable workloads, or they're feeling stressed, whatever it is, all of those things are going to derail their performance, every single one of those. So it's about staying on top of it. It's about having that monthly call for me. But obviously, I speak to my team pretty much every day. It's not a massive team, so it's not hard to do. But I don't see any conflict between that at all. People are not going to do well, or they're not going to stay with you if they're not in a happy place. What's the point in losing good people because you haven't bothered to get to the bottom of how happy they are and whether their well-being is looked after. If you look after them, also as a manager, it's not hard to work out. If you look after your team when you need extra support, or you need someone to go above and beyond, they'll come back and look after you as well. So the two are totally aligned to me. Yeah.
That's a nice structured way to do it, Steve. What's those 5 pillars, just so you can, if you wouldn't mind breaking them down?
Yeah, so we talk about kind of salary and reward. We talk about job satisfaction, talk about career development, talk about lifestyle, and we talk about job security. So we're always keeping those 5 pillars in mind on a monthly basis. So if something affects any of those, if the score goes down or it goes up or it stays consistent, and it's consistent in a high with a high number around it, we score it from 1 to 5 for each one. Then basically that's just those touch points, and we've got an annual kind of ability to look back over the year and how it went and how things improved or got worse for them at different points based on those different categories. But it then drives bigger conversations around that as well, obviously.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, Steve. Jonathan, what about the well-being piece for you?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I'm not sure I can add anything else too much on top of what Emma and Steve have already explained there. I think it's really interesting, this tension between well-being and high performance and hitting objectives. And I completely agree. I think they are intertwined. They're not separate things. I think there should be the biggest thing I see is creating an air of psychological safety, so people are able to actually voice when they're overworked or when they need some time out, and they're not going to get told by their manager, well, you can't do that right now, it's crunch time. For me, it's about forward thinking and planning. And I agree with Steve's point around, you need to sort of like have your teams back. And if you give them that time to recharge now, they'll pay it forward in some way in the future. So I think for me, it's all about psychological safety and trust, really.
Yeah, agreed. And we talked earlier on, I suppose, about the importance of having everyone collectively working towards something and the impact they can have individually. Jonathan, if I stay with you on this, so how do we what tangible things can we do to create a sense of community? So of course, we're all working towards the same goal, but we know that I think we know that actually being a part of that community can help retain people. What proactive things can we do to create that?
I think for me, like building a community in your organization is all about shared experiences. So to me, it's kind of common sense. You will want to go into work if you're going into work with a population of people that you can have interesting discussions with, or you feel like you're close with, or you feel like you have a common goal. So how do you create that feeling? Well, I think you basically build spaces and time for people to build those connections. And it could be anything as simple as some of the companies I work with, they do Tuesday morning breakfast for everyone where they buy it and everybody comes in for a free breakfast. Who doesn't like free food, right? And then they do Thursday afternoon drinks. It's inclusive because if you don't drink, you don't have to go to the Thursday one. You can come to a Tuesday breakfast and so on and so forth. So I think you have to keep that in mind. I think I've seen like culture clubs work really well, and by that I mean it's people that are given a small amount of budget to start a group that are specifically passionate about gaming or specifically passionate about other topics, where people can come together of an afternoon on like a Friday at 4 p.m. And be able to share those experiences and thoughts. So for me, it's about building those outlets and conscious thought into how do we make sure people are actually enjoying spending time with one another. Sounds really, really fluffy, but I think it's hugely important.
Yeah, I think it's a key point. You've got to be very conscious that you're doing something which everyone will, hopefully everyone will be at least able to do. And of course, I think the days of just constantly organising things around drinking are probably gone, because of course that's not going to float everyone's boat anymore. Absolutely not. Emma, in terms of this community piece, I suppose what is System One doing, or you've seen that's done really well?
Yeah, I mean, being part of a team is something that's really important to people, and it gets called out, and there's a lot of research on it as well of how important that is to people. I mean, ultimately, it is driven by the team itself. I would say probably starting with the manager encouraging it, and then you do need some engagement from the team, because as we've talked a lot about, people are individuals and they'll want different things, and so you can help support that by giving them opportunities to perhaps by talking about a budget or letting them know that they've got the opportunity to come up with ideas themselves, but where people can kind of self-arrange that. I think that's where you get the best results, because people are doing things that they actually want to do. You're not kind of like trying to create false fun and things like that. But we do promote it through our company values and behaviours. And we provide opportunities to develop the relationships that will then kind of stimulate those kind of things. So we make sure that we have opportunities where people come together, and we're largely remote working, but we try and create some of those opportunities, some of the things that Jonathan was talking about, but also having all company events where everyone comes together, and then you can form relationships with people that you wouldn't necessarily be working with on a day-to-day basis, because then you can kind of also feel like you're part of a wider community, and everybody wants to kind of interact and engage with others in different ways. So again, kind of trying to allow people to work in the way that they want to. Within the teams themselves, we find the sense of community it varies around the organisation, depending sometimes on the strengths of the management, or sometimes on the team members themselves and how much they want to be part of that community / wanted to be doing more individual working. And it's not, I mean, it's really important, but it's not enough on its own. Sometimes people do leave strong teams, quite often in the pursuit of career development. They still, if they can't get the career development that they need within that team or within that company, then having that strong team won't necessarily be enough to keep them. And occasionally it can also be the right thing for somebody to move on, because they might find that they have that career opportunity elsewhere. So it isn't always necessarily a negative thing. And I think that's important as well, is not making it always a negative thing. If somebody does choose to move on, like, people are allowed to leave teams, people are allowed to move on, and it isn't always for bad reasons. So kind of having that, we've got an alumni group where people who have left can come back and spend some time with people who are still in the company. And sometimes we have people that leave and then come back again once they've fulfilled that bit of career extension that perhaps they couldn't get within our company. So I think that's really important as well. It's like, it's a wider community of people that have worked together at some period in time, and having that kind of that positive sense of community, I think, is nice.
Yeah, I love that alumni piece. I interviewed the head of talent from Innocent Drinks last year, and they do something really similar. They make it a really big part of their whole process is that they have an alumni club, and they with that focus on making sure people always have a good exit experience when they do decide to move on. You're creating that network, and you're creating those advocates for your business who are actually going somewhere else. So actually they could be more powerful in getting people back to your business. So it's absolutely a really, really positive thing to do. So that sounds great. And Steve, anything Aston Martin are doing around that community side?
I think we're sort of communicating a lot more about our business objectives and where we're trying to get to. We're a FTSE 250 business, and a lot of the stuff that we want to do is out there publicly, but you can always do more internally with your people. And I think we just going to make, or have been making, and will continue to make more of an effort around there. For us, we make a physical product, so you can talk about where we are with products and where we are with targets and all those kind of things as well. So I think communicating more, and then I think also we're looking at doing more this year with recognition as well. We've got the ability to do some pretty special things based on what we do as a company, that people will always remember. Those experiences rather than just giving them an Amazon voucher or something, which is perfectly fine as well. I've been at other places where those work, but we really can give people some special experiences here, and we're very committed to kind of looking at that, and as we did do at the tail end of last year, and doing a lot more with that this year, a lot of which we've already kicked off actually. So I think the communication bit, to create that shared sense of focus and what you're trying to achieve as a team. We launched a kind of phrase that sort of no one builds an Aston Martin on their own, and that's true. We've all got an important part to play, whatever it is. And then we did a really nice thing, because of the kind of nature of the firm, and that relatively speaking, we're a small car company compared to a lot of others. We built a wall just outside the production line, and it basically has the names of every single person who's ever worked at the company. So it says hand built since 1913, and literally every single person's name is on there, because everybody's made an individual contribution, and it's something we do really value, and I think it's getting better at as we move forward as well.
No, I love that. Yeah, that's great. That's really great. And Steve, I'll stay with you for a sec, because I know a big focus of what you do, and I suppose your approach is developing your existing employees, and of course that's a win-win situation for all involved. So do you want to talk just a little bit about the strategies you're using, or have used even before Aston Martin, in terms of helping employees grow and develop within the company?
Yeah, so we've got a big push on internal development. We've got a strategy we call internal first. So when we're looking to make a hire, we always want to look internally first for a short period to see whether we've got somebody that wants that opportunity. Last year, over 20% of our roles were filled by people already working in the business, whether that's a move into a different department or whether that's a promotion. So again, did some good work, and this year got more to do with that as well. So definitely for us, internal career, internal mobility, that hire, develop, retain model that I talked about earlier is really, really important. And there are lots of initiatives that we've kicked off this year that are going to then support that as well. I won't go through all of them because they're still in the planning stage at the moment, but there are quite a few new things going to be coming out that every employee of the company will see as well. And that is absolutely determined to make sure that those people can see. You might have enjoyed your job for a while. You might not be sure whether it's something you want to do in the medium to long term. That's okay. For us, what we want to do is find something that's a much better option for us, to find something different for you than for you to leave because you don't think there's an opportunity for you to do something different internally. So done some good work with it last year, a lot more to do with it this year, and losing good people is just never a great situation, is it? You always want to see what else we can do for them. They know the company, they know the people, they know the culture. There's lots of things there, and it takes a little bit of time to retrain them in a new skill. That's okay, because we get all the positive benefits of them working for us for a really, really long time, and that more than makes it worthwhile for us to invest in their development and retraining them.
That's a great stat. 20% of your vacancies getting filled internally. That's something the business should definitely be proud of. Emma, in terms of the internal mobility piece, I suppose what strategies is System One putting around that?
Yeah, so we do quarterly performance management against objectives, but we make sure that as part of that we talk about personal development and career plans. So where do people want to go, what do people want to do, kind of trying to seek out those opportunities for internal mobility. And then we do the same as Steve said, we make all vacancies available internally. Alongside interviewing externally, but quite often the preference anyway would be to take somebody internal because they understand the business. So if we feel that there's opportunity to train them up to move into that position, then we'll always look at that as a preference. We want something that's going to work for everyone. It has to work for the business as well as the individual. But it's really, really important that we can try and provide those opportunities, because it is often reasons why people move on. And if you want to retain great people in the business, then providing them with opportunities to perhaps try new things. I think also There's been a lot of literature about how kind of career paths are changing. People are working for longer. They're not necessarily kind of following this kind of like structured career path where they kind of just go from one thing to the next up the ladder. They might want to try different things. They might want to kind of open up portfolio opportunities as they get older and kind of try new things and do different things and use their time differently, work around their life rather than having a life around their work. So I think it's increasingly important. The only exit interviews that ever frustrate me are ones where somebody says that they wish that they could have done something that would have actually been possible for us to make happen for them. So I really encourage managers to always be talking about those things with the people that they're managing, and making sure that they're kind of teasing out those kind of career objectives and getting people to think longer term.
Yeah, great piece of advice. Don't assume your people know what's available to them. You can't make that assumption. You need to make sure you're having those conversations. Jonathan, anything on the performance management and I suppose internal mobility piece that you're seeing working well?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of, I think, internal mobility and getting your people to stay versus leave by retraining is ideally like paramount. That's what you want. There's a lot of organizations that don't have the resources to do that. So I think if you're smaller, I've seen 20% projects work quite well. So it's a day a week where you would spend time on a different project with a different project team, maybe applying what the skill sets that you do have and learning something new whilst you're doing it. I think that's a great way for startups to use current resource without having to hire anybody new, but also giving people the opportunity to work on something slightly different. I've seen that work, very, very well. Other organizations I've worked with, they allow for research and development time. So you can have an afternoon a week where it's specifically around your own personal development. You could take on an online course, or you could do something that helps that you think will really add to your current role. And many organizations will pay for that as well. If you can kind of say to them that this will add to my current learning or my current role in XYZ ways, I think is a really good way to get people to commit some certain time. And it's also urging the managers of those people to make sure they have that time carved out. So I think the pitfalls can be, you want to do the same amount of work, and what we're doing is just adding on some kind of development stuff for you. I think it's important to carve that time out and allow people to not feel like development just means more work. It should mean specific time set aside. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I'm conscious of time, so we've got a few more questions to ask. I suppose Jonathan, I'll stay with you. So we haven't talked money, we've talked benefits a bit, we haven't talked compensation, but of course, actually, a lot of the data I've seen in the last 3 to 4 months, the differing thing has been money has often been at the top of the list of what people want. Compare that to a year to 18 months ago, it was usually second or third. But because of the cost of living and everything else that's going on in the world, money is important. It's really important right now. So how do we ensure that our compensation is competitive and fair, and what metrics we're using to measure their effectiveness in attracting and retaining top talent?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is to start using the data that's at hand in your interview pipeline. So the most obvious one is percentage of candidates lost to competing offers and why, and make sure you're recording that. I'd always urge companies to at least collect some data from candidates on why they've taken another offer, and start accumulating those, because that's really one of the key things that's going to help you make decisions based on, are we competitive in the market or not? There's obviously market data that you can pull from databases like Radford and Pave and Figures and others. I would use that. I would try to encourage most organizations to pin towards the 75th percentile of the market when it comes to compensation. You're totally right. I'm seeing the same thing as people are indexing more for what cash can I get today versus anything else. I do think there is still a population of candidates that want an invested interest in the organization though. So offering things like equity or ownership is really, really helpful to get them to feel like you've got a stake in the business. But if you cannot do that, I do think trying to accommodate for people basically indexing their life sometimes over work is actually what's happening more and more. And another thing I've seen done to good effect is a cost of living allowance or bonus, a one-off that has gone down very well, and graded based on pay levels. So saying you have a population of people who are earning £50,000 a year and below, you would give them £2,000 towards, and then kind of allocate it based on bandings. And I think trying to be proactive with those things is really important. Being reactive shows that, oh, okay, as employees, we have to make a fuss before you do anything. Actually, if you can be proactive, leadership is showing that, well, actually, we know things are tight right now and tough. How are we thinking proactively about our employees and their well-being? I think that if you get ahead of the curve in doing that, you'll ensure better retention.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for sharing. Emma, on the compensation piece, obviously really important right now. What are you seeing around that?
Yeah, so we conduct annual benchmarking, but we found that it's sometimes been important to do it more frequently, and sometimes in particular pockets as well. So like development has been changing quite a lot over the last couple of years, I'm sure you're aware, and we've been probably benchmarking that more frequently. We do collect data. We collect data on reasons why people are joining or not choosing to take our offers, and also on when people are leaving, if they're related to compensation or hard benefits. I mean, they rarely are, we find. The soft benefits like culture and support tend to be more influential, and opportunities to learn and develop tend to be the things that will either cause people to kind of join or to leave. But it's more of a hygiene factor, really, I think, in that you have to be competitive and definitely, like Jonathan says, get ahead of the curve and introduce things before it gets to the point where people are saying, like, why aren't you doing anything? Everyone else is doing something. We need help here. I mean, it's difficult because you get also, again, you've got that factor of life stage of individuals. Some people have made lifestyle choices that can then mean that their financial situation is more difficult. And how much do you help somebody to compensate for that without making sure that you're being fair to everybody in the organisation? I think we have looked at people who tend to be in the lower paid levels of the company, and looked at how we can perhaps help them, support them more, because then it really can sometimes be, I mean, in our business, not really, hopefully, financial hardship, but certainly more difficult situations. But then again, everyone's an individual and they have different challenges at different times in their life. So really, again, another difficult balance to get right. But something that's just really important, and doing that data collection within your own organisation and also outside of your organisation, talking to people in your network, find out what they're doing, working for them, that can be really helpful.
Fantastic, thanks, Emma. And Steve, finally with you, just in terms of that compensation piece, how are Aston Martin tracking it?
Not much different, really. So yes, we've got global benchmarking, access to all that kind of data. That's also not enough to have an annual report. The market moves too quickly. It really does. It's far too fluid. So we'll use things like tracking offers, tracking any trend data around there, whether we're uncompetitive in certain areas. We've got hot skills within automotive at the moment, like electrification around powertrain, as all companies move away from internal combustion engines moving forward. So you've got that time when everybody wants them, there are people around. Sometimes there are just some areas which are really, really hot, and so it's us tracking it internally within the TA team. It's recruitment agencies who we partner with, being able to share as much data as they can with competitors. Some of that's a bit sensitive, some of it's a bit difficult, but you can usually find there are ways to get access to that data. They know about companies they're not working with, for instance. So I think it's just around that, really, and then making sure, working with your reward team, that you're in a good place with that. I mean, attrition's fairly low with us in the last year. We haven't had that much of an issue around it being salary. We also look at the exit interview data. It's not very often that people leave for that particular reason. It's other reasons. And it's been very low for us, so we're never complacent around it. But I'd say probably we're reasonable.
Perfect, fantastic. Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks to the speakers. I think when it comes down to what do people want, these days they want everything. They want the money, they want the flexibility, they want the development, and more so than ever, companies have got to be keeping a tab on this and really doing their best to keep and attract the best people. We've got lots of advice in this past hour, so I hope everyone's enjoyed it and learned as much as I have. So thank you to you three speakers. Thank you for sharing what's going on in your businesses and what your own expertise around everything as well. This will be our last webinar for a little while, so our next webinars will be in April when I'm back from paternity. So thank you for listening, even live on the webinar today or on the podcast if you're catching up. But again, thank you to your speakers, and I hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you, really enjoyed it.
Thanks. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.